Welcome to Robbie's Reading Club. In this story, The Cop and the Anthem, O. Henry uses a much more sophisticated vocabulary than our last reading. His use of pretentious narration creates a sharp contrast to the dialogue that we would normally expect from the main character, a homeless bum named Soapy. To keep this video short, I'm not going to define words that you can find in a dictionary yourself. Instead, I'll focus on cultural references and special word usage, along with historical context for the story, which was written in 1904. Well into the 1960s, it was a crime to be a vagrant in most of the United States. That is, it was a crime to wander about homeless and jobless. Vagrants could be sent to prison for several months for the first offense. The police had enormous discretion in how they enforced these laws, and they tended to enforce them more strictly in wealthy neighborhoods and less so in poor neighborhoods. This story is set in and around Madison Square in Midtown Manhattan. In the Gilded Age from 1870 to 1900, Madison Square was a wealthy residential neighborhood. In the 1970s, the old Madison Square parade ground, an empty field, was transformed into Madison Square Park. I'm guessing that in 1904, the neighborhood around Madison Square Park was in transition. The first two Madison Square Garden sports arenas were built adjacent to the square. The first was an outdoor arena built in 1879, and the second, an indoor arena built in 1890, was there at the time of this story. The areas around sports arenas tend to be pretty seedy, that is, run down and disreputable, so Soapy can sleep on park benches without being chased away by the police. Another focus of the story is Blackwell Island, which is now known as Roosevelt Island. It's an island in the middle of the East River between Manhattan and Queens that housed a prison, an insane asylum, and a hospital for people with contagious diseases like tuberculosis. Note that in this illustration from 1902, the Queensboro Bridge passes high over the island without stopping there. That's because the intent was to keep the undesirables on the island isolated from the rest of the city. At one point, O. Henry writes of a man running to catch a car. That probably meant running to catch a streetcar, not an automobile or a taxi. In 1904, horse-drawn streetcars were just being replaced by electric trolleys. They weren't completely phased out until 1917, and electric trolleys operated into the 1950s, when they were replaced by buses. Note that the front banner on this streetcar reads Madison Avenue. Let's begin. On his bench in Madison Square, Soapy moved uneasily, when wild geese hunk high of nights, and when women without sealskin coats grow kind to their husbands, and when Soapy moves uneasily on his bench in the park, you may know that winter is near at hand. A dead leaf fell in Soapy's lap. That was Jack Frost's card. Jack is kind to the regular denizens of Madison Square, and gives fair warning of his annual call. At the corner of 4 streets, he hands his pasteboard to the North Wind, footman of the mansion of the all-outdoors, so that the inhabitants thereof may make ready. When wild geese honk high at night refers to migrating geese. When you hear geese honking overhead and look up to see them flying south in the autumn, it signals that winter is coming. Sealskins make an excellent winter coat. As winter approaches, women without sealskin coats grow kind to their husbands, in the hope their husbands will buy them such an expensive coat. Jack Frost is the personification of winter, so Jack Frost's card is his calling card, similar to a modern business card announcing that he has arrived. Pasteboard is laminated paper, like cardboard, the corrugated cardboard that we know was just becoming popular at this time. Soapy's mind became cognizant of the fact that the time had come for him to resolve himself into a singular committee of ways and means to provide against the coming rigor, and therefore he moved uneasily on his bench. The hibernatorial ambitions of Soapy were not of the highest. In them there were no considerations of Mediterranean cruises, of Suffolk southern skies drifting in the Vesuvian Bay. 3 months in the island was what his soul craved. 3 months of assured board and bed and congenial company, safe from bores and bluecoats, seemed to Soapy the essence of things desirable. So a committee of ways and means is a government body that decides how to raise money for government programs. So this is a pretentious way of indicating that Soapy is debating with himself how to raise money for his needs. The coming rigor refers to the harshness and severity of the winter weather. I'm guessing that hibernatorial is a variation of hibernation coined by O. Henry. I can imagine the old comedian W.C. Fields, who was just becoming famous at that time, saying, "Ah, my hibernatorial ambition." Sophoric means causing sleep. Boreas is the Greek god of the north wind, cold winds coming from the north. In New York City, policemen wore blue uniforms, so blue coats are policemen. For years, the hospitable Blackwells had been his winter quarters, just as his more fortunate fellow New Yorkers had bought their ticket to Palm Beach and the Riviera each winter. So Soapy had made his humble arrangements for his annual hegira to the island, and now the time was come. On the previous night, 3 Sabbath newspapers, distributed beneath his coat, about his ankles, and over his lap, had failed to repulse the cold as he slept on his bench near the spurting fountain in the ancient square. So the island loomed big and timely in Soapy's mind. He scorned the provisions, made in the name of charity, for the city's dependents. In Soapy's opinion, the law was more benign than philanthropy. There was an endless round of institutions, municipal and eleemosynary, on which he might set out and receive food and lodging, accordant with a simple life. But to one of Soapy's proud spirit, the gifts of charity are encumbered. If not in coin, you must pay in humiliation of spirit for every benefit received at the hand of philanthropy. As Caesar had his Brutus, every bed of charity must have its toll of a bath, every loaf of bread its compensation of a private and personal inquisition. Wherefore it is better to be a guest of the law, which, though conducted by rules, does not meddle unduly with a gentleman's private affairs. Blackwell refers to Blackwell's Island. Hegira is a Latin word for a journey to a more comfortable place. Sabbath newspapers. When I was a kid, the Sunday edition of the New York Times was around 2 inches thick and several hundred pages long. Many people would spend a few hours on Sunday morning reading through all the special reports and looking at endless pages of advertisements. 3 copies of this broadsheet paper would be enough to spread out and cover your entire body as a blanket. The term ancient square seems to have been a joke, since the park wasn't very old and the fountain was only installed a few years before, around 1900. More benign than philanthropy. Philanthropy is supposed to be concerned for the welfare of others, but Soapy implies that philanthropy is more malignant than the law. At the time, charitable organizations often required that recipients listen to their sermons before receiving any aid. Eleemosynary is a Latin word for charitable. The gifts of charity are encumbered, means that the gifts are tied to obligations and debt, so they really aren't gifts at all. Caesar had his Brutus, Brutus being an assassin. Soapy compares being forced to take a bath to being violently murdered, and being asked personal questions to being assassinated. Soapy, having decided to go to the island, at once set about accomplishing his desire. There were many easy ways of doing this. The pleasantest was to dine at some expensive restaurant, and then, after declaring insolvency, to be handed over quietly and without uproar to a policeman. An accommodating magistrate would do the rest. Soapy left his bench and strolled out of the square and across the level sea of asphalt where Broadway and Fifth Avenue flowed together. Up Broadway he turned and halted at a glittering cafe where are gathered together nightly the choicest products of the grape, the silkworm, and the protoplasm. So declaring insolvency is a fancy way of saying that he doesn't have enough money to pay his debts. Accommodating implies that the magistrate will be eager to help. Accommodations mean lodging, which may have been intended to play on words. The choicest product of the grape is wine, of silkworm is silk, and of protoplasm is, I'm guessing, meat. Soapy had confidence in himself. From the lowest button of his vest upward, he was shaven, and his coat was decent, and his neat black, ready-tied, four-in-hand had been presented to him by a lady missionary on Thanksgiving Day. If he could reach a table in the restaurant unsuspected, success would be his. The portion of him that would show above the table would raise no doubt in the waiter's mind. A roasted mallard duck, thought Soapy, would be about the thing, with a bottle of Chablis and then Camembert, a demi-tasse and a cigar. $1 for the cigar would be enough. The total would not be so high as to call forth any supreme manifestation of revenge from the cafe management. And yet the meat would leave him filled and happy for the journey to his winter refuge. But as Soapy set foot inside the restaurant door, the head waiter's eyes fell upon his frayed trousers and decadent shoes. Strong and ready hands turned him about and conveyed him in silence and haste to the sidewalk, and averted the ignoble fate of the menaced Mallard. From the lowest button of his vest indicates that his clothes on his upper body are presentable, but from the waist down are not presentable. A four-in-hand is a long necktie to be tied in a slip knot with the ends left hanging, common today. Roast mallard. A demitasse is the small cup that used to serve espresso or strong coffee. In this case, winter refuge doesn't refer to shelter from the cold weather, but rather to a vacation house in a more temperate climate. O. Henry uses the literal meaning of decadent shoes for shoes that are physically decaying, rather than the more common usage of moral or cultural decay. Strong hands turned him. They grabbed him by the arms, turned him around, lifted him, and carried him out. Ignoble literally means not noble or of low character, so the menaced duck is spared from the ignoble fate of being eaten by a vagrant. Soapy turned off Broadway. It seemed that his route to the coveted island was not to be an Epicurean one. Some other way of entering limbo must be thought of. At a corner of 6th Avenue, electric lights and cunningly displayed wares behind plate glass made a shop window conspicuous. Soapy took a cobblestone and dashed it through the glass. People came running around the corner, a policeman in the lead. Soapy stood still with his hands in his pocket and smiled at the sight of brass buttons. "Where's the man that done that?" inquired the officer excitedly. "Don't you figure out that I might have had something to do with it?" said Soapy, not without sarcasm, but friendly as one greets good fortune. Soapy was not going to be able to get arrested through Epicurean, that is, luxurious eating and drinking. At that time, Lower 6th Avenue was known as the ladies' miles of department stores, hence the brightly lit shop windows. The grand department stores closed long ago, but this building still remains at 20th Street. At the time, New York streets were paved with cobblestone, large granite blocks with rounded edges. In this case, dashed through a window meant that he threw the stone through the glass. The sight of brass buttons mean the sight of a policeman whose uniforms had brass buttons. The policeman's mind refused to accept Soapy, even as a clue. Men who smash windows do not remain to parley with the law's minions. They take to their heels. The policeman saw a man halfway down the block running to catch a car. With club drawn, he joined in the pursuit. Soapy, with disgust in his heart, loafed along, twice unsuccessful. On the opposite side of the street was a restaurant of no great pretensions. It catered to large appetites and modest purses. Its crockery and atmosphere were thick, its soup and napery thin. Into this place Soapy took his accusive shoes and telltale trousers without challenge. At a table he sat and consumed beefsteak, flapjacks, donuts, and pie, and then to the waiter he betrayed the fact that the minutest coin and himself were strangers. The law's minions refers to policemen as servants or minor people in power. They take to their heels means they run away. Once again, running to catch a streetcar probably meant running to catch a horse-drawn streetcar or perhaps an electric trolley, but not an automobile. Loafed along means walked leisurely or lazy pace. Its crockery and atmosphere thick. So many inexpensive restaurants still use thick, heavy crockery. That's dishes, cups, and plates. That is more difficult to break. And a thick atmosphere may imply either a smoke-filled room or a lack of ventilation in a crowded room. Its soup and napery thin. Cheap, thin soup is mostly water, and thin napkins are very inexpensive. Accusive shoes. That's not accusative, but a word that Henry has coined to mean accusing. Soapy's shoes are accusing him of being penniless. And telltale trousers. In this case, Soapy's trousers heedlessly, maliciously reveal the private, confidential matter of his pennilessness. "Now get busy and call a cop," said Soapy, "and don't keep a gentleman waiting." "No cop for you," said the waiter, with a voice like buttercakes, but an eye like the cherry in a Manhattan cocktail. "Hey, Con!" Neatly upon his left ear, on the callous pavement, two waiters pitched Soapy. He arose joint by joint, as a carpenter's rule opens, and beat the dust from his clothes. Arrest seemed but a rosy dream. The island seemed very far away. A policeman, who stood before a drugstore 2 doors away, laughed and walked down the street. No cop for yous. In standard English, you don't differentiate between singular you and plural you. That's really dumb. So many local dialects have compensated by creating a plural form of you. In New York, some people say yous, adding an S to create a plural form. In southern states, many people say you all or y'all to create a plural form. This is improper, but it's a practical compensation for a deficiency of English. A voice like buttercakes is soft and smooth. That's in contrast to eyes like preserved cherries in cocktails, which are bright red with anger. Two waiters pitched Soapy upon his left ear. They literally picked him up and threw him, where he landed with his head striking the pavement. Today, this would be considered violent assault resulting in civil lawsuits and possible criminal charges against the waiter and the restaurant owner. Back then, Soapy would be considered as stealing food directly from the mouths of the restaurant workers' families, and the waiter's actions would be considered as justified. I'm pointing this out because it's an enormous cultural gap that is incomprehensible to many Americans today. Tolerance for petty theft is a luxury that only very wealthy societies with generous social support systems can afford. This is an old-fashioned carpenter's ruler. These have been replaced by retractable tape measures, but there are still many things you can do with a carpenter's ruler that you can't do with a new tape measure. It unfolds like this. So Soapy raised himself, lifted himself up from the pavement, unfolding joint by joint. The policeman laughed and walked away. I just want to emphasize that poor people did not have equal rights. The police were there to maintain order, but it was generally accepted that citizens had the right to protect themselves against thieves and criminals. 5 blocks Soapy traveled before his courage permitted him to woo capture again. This time, the opportunity presented what he fatuously termed to himself a cinch. A young woman of a modest and pleasing guise was standing before a show window, gazing with sprightly interest at its display of shaving mugs and inkstands, and 2 yards away from the window a large policeman of severe demeanor leaned against a water plug. It was Soapy's design to assume the role of the despicable and execrated masher. The refined and elegant appearance of his victim and the contiguity of the conscientious cop encouraged him to believe they would soon feel the pleasant official clutch upon his arm that would ensure his winter quarters on the right little, tight little aisle. A cinch is something that's very easy. I wonder if that's related to the cinch or strap that holds a horse's saddle in place. I'm not sure. In this case, modest means that she's not dressed in a flashy way. She's not trying to attract people. An inkstand holds the jar of ink that you dip your quill or pen in to write. Here's a picture of a simple one, but these can be extremely ornate and were sometimes used as ostentatious displays of wealth and sophistication. A water plug is a fire hydrant, also known as a fire plug or a Johnny Bump. A masher is a man who approaches women he does not know and suggests they get physically intimate. I always thought the word implied pressing his body up against them in an unwanted physical contact, but I may be wrong. The use of contiguity to describe how close the cop is standing to them is another example of pretentious vocabulary. To clutch is to seize and hold firmly. Soapy wants to be under the control of the law. Soapy straightened his lady missionary's ready-made tie, dragged his shirt cuffs into the open, set his hat at a killing cant, and sidled toward the young woman. He made eyes at her, was taken with sudden coughs and hems, smiled, smirked, and went brazenly through the impudent and contemptible litany of the masher. With half an eye, Soapy saw that the policeman was watching him fixedly. The young woman moved a few steps away, and again bestowed her absorbed attention upon the shaving mugs. Soapy followed, boldly stepping to her side, raised his hat, and said to himself, "Ah, there, Bedelia, don't you want to come and play in my yard?" A man's shirt cuffs are supposed to extend half an inch beyond the cuffs of his jacket. Shrinking cuffs implies that his shirt sleeves are too short, so he has to pull the cuffs down so that they extend beyond the cuffs of his jacket. A lady killer is a man who is irresistible to women. When I set my hat at a killing cant, it makes me irresistible to women. In 1903, there was a hit song about a girl named Bedelia. It was the Irish Coon Song Serenade, sung by Bill Murray, with a line about a charming Irish lady with a roguish winning way. The term coon means rustic and undignified, much the way another singer later described himself as nothing but a hound dog. There are no racial implications to the word coon. The policeman was still looking. The persecuted young woman had but to beckon a finger, and Soapy would be practically en route for his insular haven. Already, he imagined he could feel the cozy warmth of the station house. The young woman faced him and, stretching out a hand, caught Soapy's coat sleeve. "Sure, Mike," she said joyfully. "If you'll blow me to a pail of suds, I'd have spoken to you sooner, but the cop was watching." With the young woman playing the clinging ivy to his oak, Soapy walked past the policeman, overcome with gloom. He seemed doomed to liberty. The station house is the police station. A pail of suds is a pitcher of beer. Not a glass, but a pitcher. She doesn't want Soapy to buy her a glass of beer. She wants him to buy her a pitcher of beer. He's doomed to liberty. No matter how hard he tries, he can't convince the police to take his liberty. At the next corner, he shook off his companion and ran. He halted in the district where by night are found the lightest streets, hearts, vows, and librettos. Women in furs and men in greatcoats moved gaily in the wintry air. A sudden fear seized Soapy that some dreadful enchantment had rendered him immune to arrest. The thought brought a little of panic upon it, and when he came upon another policeman, lounging grandly in front of a transplendent theater, he caught at the immediate straw of disorderly conduct. On the sidewalk, Soapy began to yell drunken gibberish at the top of his harsh voice. He danced, howled, raved, and otherwise disturbed the welkin. The policeman twirled his cub, turned his back to Soapy, and remarked to a citizen, "'Tis one of them Yale lads celebrating the goose egg they give to the Hartford College. Noisy, but no harm. We've instructions to lave them be." Disconsolate, Soapy ceased his unavailing racket. Would never a policeman lay hands on him? In his fancy, the island seemed an unattainable Arcadia. He buttoned his thin coat against the chilly wind. The lightest vows are promises made lightly that the person making doesn't intend to keep. The lightest librettos are lyrics, as in love songs, declaring a love that isn't really sincere. Greatcoats are long winter coats that you might wear if you had to spend hours outside in cold weather. Transplendent is the superlative of resplendent, meaning shining, gleaming, and splendid in the highest degree. Welkin is an old Middle English word for sky or heavens. Soapy's howling is disturbing the heavens. The term goose egg mixes nest egg with the eggs of a golden goose. The lads are celebrating a large donation made to the college's endowment. An unattainable Arcadia. Soapy is comparing the prison on Blackwell's Island to a beautiful mountainous region of ancient Greece that became synonymous with peace and simplicity. This is modern Arcadia, but you get the idea. In a cigar store, he saw a well-dressed man lighting a cigarette at a swinging light. His silk umbrella he had set by the door on entering. Soapy stepped inside, secured the umbrella, and sauntered off with it slowly. The man at the cigar light followed hastily. "My umbrella!" he said sternly. "Oh, is it?" sneered Soapy, adding insult to petty larceny. "Well, why don't you call a policeman? I took it, your umbrella. Why don't you call a cop? There stands one on the corner." The umbrella owner slowed his steps. Soapy did likewise, with a presentiment that luck would again run against them. The policeman looked at the two curiously. "Of course," said the umbrella man. "That is, well, you know how these mistakes occur. If it's your umbrella, I hope you'll excuse me. I picked it up this morning in a restaurant. If you recognize it as yours, why, I hope you'll—" "Of course it's mine," said Soapy viciously. The ex-umbrella man retreated. The policeman hurried to assist a tall blonde in an opera coat across the street, in front of a streetcar that was approaching 2 blocks away. Soapy walked eastward, through a street damaged by improvements. He hurled the umbrella wrathfully into an excavation. He muttered against the men who wear helmets and carry clubs, because he wanted to fall into their clutches. They seemed to regard him as a king who could do no wrong. The streetcar was approaching 2 blocks away. There was no reason for the policeman to hurry. He was just distracted by an attractive woman. A street damaged by improvement may just mean the street was temporarily torn up to be paved, but seems to imply the improvements weren't as good as the original. Perhaps they were replacing cobblestones with asphalt. The men who wear helmets and carry clubs are the police. At length Soapy reached one of the avenues to the east, where the glitter and turmoil was but faint. He set his face down this towards Madison Square, for the homing instinct survives even when the home is a park bench. But on an unusually quiet corner, Soapy came to a standstill. Here was an old church, quaint and rambling and gabled. Through one violet-stained window a soft light glowed, where, no doubt, the organist loitered over the keys, making sure of his mastery of the coming Sabbath anthem. For there drifted out to Soapy's ears sweet music that caught and held him, transfixed against the convolutions of the iron fence. The moon was above, lustrous and serene. Vehicles and pedestrians were few. Sparrows twittered sleepily in the eaves. For a little while the scene might have been a country churchyard, and the anthem that the organist played cemented Soapy to the iron fence, for he had known it well in the days when his life contained such things as mothers and roses and ambitions and friends and immaculate thoughts and collars. The organist loitered over the keys, may reflect Soapy's feeling that he's not really working. Sabbath anthem refers to the hymn to be sung at church that Sunday. Cemented Soapy to the iron fence is an unusual way of saying that Soapy was glued or transfixed to the fence. Soapy is filled with emotion as he remembered the days when he had immaculate collars or clean shirts. The conjunction of Soapy's receptive state of mind and the influence of the old church wrought a sudden and wonderful change in his soul. He viewed with swift horror the pit into which he had tumbled, the degraded days, unworthy desires, dead hopes, wrecked faculties, and base motives that made up his existence. Also in a moment, his heart responded thrillingly to the novel mood. An instantaneous and strong impulse moved him to battle with his desperate fate. He would pull himself out of the mire. He would make a man of himself again. He would conquer the evil that had taken possession of him. There was time. He was comparatively young yet. He would resurrect his old eager ambitions and pursue them without faltering. Those solemn but sweet organ notes had set up a revolution in him. Tomorrow he would go into the roaring downtown district and find work. A fur importer had once offered him a place as a driver. He would find him tomorrow and ask for the position. He would be someone in the world. He would... Soapy felt a hand laid on his shoulder. He looked quietly around into the broad face of a policeman. "What are you doing here?" asked the officer. "Nothing," said Soapy. "Then come along," said the policeman. 3 months on the island," said the magistrate in the police court the next morning. The end. Fate can be cruel and unjust. I hope that other Soapies of the world have the resilience to recover, but given this one's past, it seems unlikely. So be kind. You never know what someone is going through. And afterward about the criminal justice system. Since 1881, New York State has required that courts appoint private counsel on a pro bono basis for unrepresented defendants in felony indictments. First, note that you get what you pay for. So a lawyer working for free probably isn't working very hard. Second, Soapy isn't being arrested for a felony. He was probably arrested for loitering or vagrancy, so he wouldn't get a free lawyer. He's taken before the magistrate in the police court, which probably meant a small hearing room in the police station. The judge listens to the policeman's charges, then asks Soapy if he has anything to say. Soapy probably isn't capable of defending himself. Even if he could give a rational explanation of what he was doing, he probably doesn't know the legal terminology, so the judge would convict him. The entire process would probably be over in 15 minutes. There is still a difference between the way rich people and poor people are treated by the criminal justice system, but it was much greater in 1904. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this reading.